My daughter-in-law called me a tramp because I don't work anymore. A single word, sharp and venomous, shot across the dinner table. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating, silencing the clatter of forks and the low hum of the refrigerator. It wasn't just an insult, it was a judgment, a dismissal of my entire life. My 67 years of work, of raising a son, of loving and losing a husband, all of it erased in a single ugly moment. My son, Mark, just stared at his plate, his silence a betrayal more profound than any word could ever be. This was the moment the dam of my patience, worn thin by years of subtle digs and casual disrespect, finally broke. I had given them everything, but when respect vanishes, a choice must be made. I'm glad you're here to listen. Follow my story to the end and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. If you enjoy stories like mine, consider subscribing to the channel for more. My name is Eleanor, and for the last 45 years, my life had been defined by my roles: wife, mother, office manager. I was the reliable one, the steady hand, the one who always had a plan. My husband, Robert, and I had built a good life in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We saved diligently, invested wisely, and planned for a retirement where we could finally enjoy the fruits of our labor. We dreamed of traveling, of seeing the Grand Canyon, of maybe even taking a cruise to Alaska. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack just 2 years after I retired, leaving me with a home full of memories and a future that felt terrifyingly empty. My son Mark was my anchor in that storm. He and his wife, Jessica, were there for the funeral, offering condolences and lukewarm hugs. They had married young, and I'd always done my best to support them. When they needed a down payment for their first apartment, I co-signed the loan. When Mark's old car gave out, I helped them buy a more reliable one so they could get to work safely. After Robert died, that support became more structured. A portion of my husband's pension, a considerable sum, was something I decided to share. I set up an automatic monthly transfer to their account, $5,000 every month, without fail. At first, I told myself it was what Robert would have wanted. He'd always worried about Mark, who had a good heart but a tendency to drift, never quite finding a career path that stuck. Jessica, on the other hand, was all ambition. She worked in marketing, a world of sleek presentations and sharp suits, and she saw my monthly contribution as their due. It wasn't a gift, it was an expectation. "It just makes sense, Eleanor," she'd explained once, her tone suggesting I was too simple to understand modern finances. "With your assets, this is just smart estate planning. It helps us build our future, and it lowers your tax burden eventually." I didn't know much about tax burdens, but I knew the feeling of being treated like a walking ATM. The early days of my widowhood were a blur of grief. The transfers were just one less thing to think about. I filled my days with gardening and volunteering at the local library, trying to build a new routine. But as the fog of loss began to lift, the nature of my relationship with Mark and Jessica came into sharp, painful focus. My phone calls to Mark often went to voicemail, returned with a brief text message days later. "Hey Mom, sorry, crazy busy week. Talk soon." Soon rarely came. Invitations to my house for dinner were met with excuses. "Oh, we'd love to, Eleanor, but Jess has a work thing," or "Mark's fantasy football draft is tonight." You know how it is. Yet their social media accounts painted a different picture. Pictures of expensive dinners with friends, weekend trips to Chicago, a new designer handbag for Jessica that she'd proudly displayed on Instagram. They weren't just getting by, they were thriving, living a life well beyond their means, a life subsidized by my late husband's hard-earned money. And my role in that life was becoming increasingly clear. I was the silent, invisible benefactor. The disrespect was rarely overt, at least not at first. It was in the little things. The way Jessica would speak to me, as if I were a child, explaining simple technology with exaggerated patience. The way they'd forget my birthday until a day or two later, the belated flowers always feeling like an afterthought. They'd visit on major holidays, of course. Their presence was a performance, a box to be checked. They would sit on my couch, the same couch Robert and I had picked out together, and scroll through their phones, offering distracted, one-word answers to my questions about their lives. I tried to bridge the gap. I'd suggest we take a trip together, using the money I was giving them to create some family memories. We could go to the Rockies, Mark. Your father always wanted to show you the mountains. He'd get a flicker of interest in his eyes before Jessica would interject. We can't possibly get away right now, Eleanor. My Q4 targets are insane. The message was clear. My time, my company, held no value, only my money did. The day of the Tramp comment started like any other Sunday. They had agreed to come for dinner, a rare event I'd spent 2 days preparing for. I made Robert's favorite pot roast, filled the house with the scent of cinnamon and baked apples, and set the table with the good china. I was hopeful, as I always was, that this time would be different, that we could connect, that I could feel like a mother again, and not just a line item in their budget. They arrived late, blaming traffic that I knew, from a quick check on my tablet, didn't exist. They were distracted from the moment they walked in. Jessica was tapping away at her phone, while Mark seemed distant, his eyes glazed over. Dinner was a stilted affair. I tried to ask about their work, their friends. Jessica gave a monologue about a difficult client, using industry jargon I couldn't follow. Mark just shrugged when I asked about his job at the logistics company. "It's fine," he mumbled, pushing food around his plate. The conversation eventually turned to my life, as it sometimes did when they wanted to remind me of my perceived irrelevance. "So what have you been up to, Eleanor?" Jessica asked, her voice dripping with faux interest. "Watering your plants, reading more books." "I've been enjoying the library," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "And my garden is doing quite well this year. The tomatoes are." "You know," she interrupted, setting her fork down with a deliberate click. "My friend's mom just went back to work part-time. She's 70, says it keeps her sharp." She looked at me, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "It's a shame you just gave up after Robert passed. It's not healthy to do nothing all day. People will think you're lazy." The air crackled. I could feel the blood rising to my cheeks. "I worked for 45 years, Jessica. I raised a family. I am not doing nothing. I'm retired." "Retired, lazy. It's a fine line, isn't it?" she scoffed, taking a sip of wine. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Jess, come on." "What, Mark?" she snapped, turning on him. "It's true. We're out there hustling every single day, trying to build a life, and your mom is just sitting here. It's not like she even has to worry about money." She gestured around my modest dining room, as if it were a palace. "That money is here because your father-in-law and I worked hard for it," I said, my voice trembling slightly, and that's when she said it. She let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Work? You haven't worked in years. You're just a tramp, living off a dead man's money." "Tramp." The word echoed in the sudden deafening silence. It was a physical blow. I looked at my son, my only child, praying he would say something, anything. Defend me, tell his wife she had crossed a line. But he didn't. He just picked up his fork and took a bite of pot roast, his gaze fixed on the table. In his silence, he co-signed her cruelty. He agreed. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. A strange cold calm washed over me. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed frustrations, of feeling like a ghost in my own family, all of it coalesced into a single hard point of clarity. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. "I think dinner is over," I said, my voice a flat monotone. "You should both leave." Jessica looked shocked, as if she couldn't believe I had the audacity to react. "Well, I never." "No," I said, looking directly at her. "You never have. You've never had respect. You've never had gratitude. You've only ever had your hand out." I turned my gaze to Mark, who finally looked up, his eyes wide with a flicker of fear. "Get out of my house." They left without another word, leaving a half-eaten dinner on the table. and the ghost of that ugly word in the air. I stood alone in my dining room, the scent of cinnamon now seeming to mock me. I didn't clean up. I walked into my office, sat down at the desk Robert had built, and stared at the framed photo of us on our wedding day. We were so young, so full of hope. We had planned for a future together, a future of peace and mutual respect. This was not it. The hurt was a deep physical ache in my chest, but beneath the hurt, something else was stirring. It was a slow-burning fire of indignation. The woman they saw, the useless, lazy tramp, was not me. I was the woman who had balanced budgets, managed employees, nursed a sick husband, and raised a son. I had value, I had worth, and they had taken my generosity and twisted it into a weapon to use against me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, replaying every dismissive comment, every forgotten birthday, every silent transactional visit. The monthly $5,000 payment wasn't a gift anymore, it was a leash. It kept them tethered to me, but it kept me tethered to their disrespect. It was a bribe for their fleeting hollow attention, and it had to stop. The decision settled in my soul, not with a crash, but with a quiet, firm click, like a lock falling into place. It was over. The bank of Eleanor was officially closed. The first light of dawn crept through the blinds, casting long, grey stripes across the living room carpet. I hadn't moved from my armchair all night. The house was silent, but my mind was a raging storm. The word tramp was on a continuous loop, each repetition chipping away at the foundation of love and duty I had so carefully constructed over the years. But with the morning sun came a fragile sense of resolve. The anger hadn't faded, but it had refined itself into something steely and purposeful. I made a pot of coffee, the familiar ritual, a small comfort in a world that had tilted on its axis. As I sipped the hot, black liquid, I looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. The woman staring back at me looked tired, her eyes puffy and her face etched with the pain of the previous night. But there was a hardness in her jaw that I hadn't seen before. It was the look of a woman who had been pushed too far. There was no hesitation. I walked into my office, the same room where I'd made the decision hours before, and booted up my old desktop computer. The screen flickered to life, illuminating the photos on my desk. Mark as a boy with a gap-toothed smile, Robert and me on a beach in Florida, my parents on their 50th wedding anniversary. A pang of sorrow hit me. This wasn't just about Mark and Jessica. It was about the legacy of my family, a legacy of hard work and mutual respect that they had so carelessly desecrated. I opened my web browser and navigated to my bank's website. My fingers, usually so nimble on the keyboard from my years as an office manager, felt clumsy. I typed in my username and password, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. There it was on the screen, a summary of my accounts, my checking, my savings, and the investment portfolio Robert had left me. And under the Bill Pay and Transfers tab, the recurring payment that had become the source of my misery. Monthly transfer to Mark Evans. Next to it, the amount $5,000. The next payment was scheduled to go out in 3 days. My mouse hovered over the cancel button. For a fleeting moment, a wave of doubt washed over me. What if this was too harsh? Mark was my son. Was I cutting him off? Was I abandoning him? Then I heard Jessica's voice in my head, sharp and cruel, "Tramp," and I saw Mark's face, his eyes avoiding mine, his silence a deafening endorsement of her words. This wasn't abandonment, it was self-preservation. This wasn't about punishing my son, it was about teaching him that my love was not unconditional, not when it was repaid with such profound disrespect. My dignity had to be worth more than their financial comfort. I clicked cancel, a confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer? My finger didn't waver. I clicked yes. A small green notification appeared at the top of the screen. Your scheduled transfer has been successfully cancelled. I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was done. A profound sense of relief washed over me, so potent it felt like I could float. It was the first time in a long time that I felt truly in control of my own life, my own resources. The $5,000 that appeared in my account each month from Robert's pension suddenly felt like my money again, not theirs. The rest of the day passed in a quiet haze. I finally cleaned up the remnants of the disastrous dinner, scraping the cold pot roast into the trash. It felt symbolic, like I was scraping away the last vestiges of my old life, my old role as the endlessly giving matriarch. I spent the afternoon in my garden, my hands buried in the cool, dark earth, pulling weeds with a vengeance. With each weed I yanked from the soil, I felt a little lighter. I knew the phone call would come. I just didn't know when. It came 2 days later, the 3rd of the month, the day the transfer usually hit their account. My phone rang around noon. The caller ID showed Mark. I let it ring, my heart starting to pound again. It went to voicemail. A minute later, a text message. "Hey Mom, did you get a new bank or something? The transfer didn't come through. Can you check on it? Jess is kind of freaking out. The mortgage payment is due." I stared at the message. No apology, no mention of the horrible dinner. Just a transactional, straight-to-the-point inquiry about the money, as if nothing had happened. The casualness of it, the sheer entitlement, solidified my resolve. I didn't reply. He called again an hour later. This time I answered. "Mom, what's going on? The money's not here." His voice was strained, impatient. I kept my own voice calm, level. "I'm aware of that, Mark." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Okay, so what's the problem? Is there an issue with the bank?" "There's no issue with the bank," I said. I cancelled the transfer. Silence, a long, heavy silence that stretched for what felt like an eternity. I could hear Jessica's muffled voice in the background, frantic and high-pitched. "What does she mean? She cancelled it. What's she talking about?" Then Mark's voice came back, no longer impatient but sharp with anger. "What do you mean, you cancelled it? Why would you do that? We depend on that money, Mom. The mortgage, the car payments. I'm aware of what you use it for, Mark," I said, my voice still quiet. "I've been aware for years. So you're just cutting us off? Just like that? After everything? After everything? Let's talk about after everything, Mark. Let's talk about Sunday night. Let's talk about what your wife called me, in my own home, at my own dinner table." He stammered. "Look, Jess, she was stressed. She didn't mean it like that. She apologizes." "No, she doesn't," I said. "You're just saying that now because the money is gone. And more importantly, Mark, you didn't say a word. You sat there and let her call me a tramp. Your mother, a tramp." The word tasted like poison, even now. "Your silence told me everything I needed to know. It told me you agree with her." "That's not true," he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I was just trying to keep the peace." "There is no peace, Mark. There is you and your wife on one side, and me on the other, funding your lifestyle while you treat me with contempt. That arrangement is now over. The peace you were keeping was at the expense of my dignity, and I'm not willing to pay that price anymore." I could hear Jessica screaming in the background now. "Give me the phone." Mark was trying to shush her. The line was a mess of chaotic, angry noise. It was ugly and raw, but for the first time it was honest. This was who they were when the mask of civility slipped, when the money tap was turned off. "This is insane, Mom." Mark's voice was desperate. "You're blowing this completely out of proportion." It was one word. It was the last word. "Mark," I said softly. It was the one that finally made me see the truth. "The transfers are cancelled. Permanently. You and Jessica are adults. It's time you learned to live on your own income." I hung up before he could reply. My hand was shaking, and tears were blurring my vision, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of release, of a lifetime of pent-up frustration finally finding a voice. The quiet life I had built for myself had been shattered. but in its place, I was going to build something stronger, something that was entirely my own. The battle had just begun. I knew, but I had won the first, most important victory. I had chosen myself. Now I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And if you're finding value in my story, please leave a like to help it reach more people. The weeks after the lawn confrontation were the quietest of all. The silence from Mark and Jessica was no longer anxious. It was absolute. It was the silence of a door that had been firmly, irrevocably closed. In that silence, I began to truly hear myself for the first time in years. I discovered that I actually enjoyed my own company. I woke up each morning not with a sense of dread or obligation, but with a simple question: what do I want to do today? Some days the answer was gardening. I tended to my new roses with a devotion that bordered on obsession. They became a symbol of my new life, beautiful, thorny, and entirely my own. Other days I would drive to the Hocking Hills State Park, an hour south of Columbus, and walk the trails. I'd pack a simple lunch, sit by a waterfall, and listen to the sounds of the forest. It was a peace Robert and I had always planned to enjoy together, and while a deep sadness for his absence remained, I found I could still find joy in it for both of us. The $5,000 a month became my adventure fund. I used it to buy a new camera and took up photography, finding beauty in the small details of the world around me. The pattern of frost on a window pane, the vibrant color of a cardinal against the snow. I bought a season pass to the local theater and saw plays and musicals, something I hadn't done in decades. I was not just surviving, I was living, rediscovering the woman I was before I became defined solely by my relationships to others. My friend Sarah was my steadfast companion on this new journey. We took a pottery class together, laughing at our lopsided creations. We joined a book club at the library, where I was no longer just a volunteer but a participant, engaging in lively debates about literature and life. I have a confession, Sarah told me one evening over coffee. I was worried about you. I thought cutting them off might send you into a depression, that the loneliness would be too much. I was worried too, I admitted, but it's funny, I was more lonely when they were in my life. I was constantly striving for their approval, for a crumb of affection. I felt invisible. Now, I feel seen because I am the one doing the seeing. The final act of the drama came about 3 months after our last encounter. The letter arrived in a plain white envelope, the return address a law office I didn't recognize. My stomach twisted into a knot. I opened it with trembling fingers. It was a formal notification that Mark and Jessica Evans were undergoing foreclosure proceedings on their home. The bank would be auctioning the property in 60 days. I sat down heavily at my kitchen table, the letter lying starkly against the polished wood. There was no triumph, no sense of dry, told you so. There was only a deep, profound ache of sorrow. This was the real-world consequence. My son was losing his home. My initial instinct, the maternal pull that had guided my entire life, was to pick up the phone, to call the bank, to fix it, to write a check, and make it all go away. I held the phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over Mark's contact information. I thought about his childhood, about patching up his scraped knees, about the pride I felt at his high school graduation. Had I done the right thing? Had my stand for dignity cost my son his future? And then I thought about the coldness in Jessica's eyes. I thought about Mark's silence, his refusal to stand up for me. I thought about the years of being treated like a utility. Fixing this now would solve the immediate problem, but it would erase the lesson. It would reset the dynamic back to the toxic transactional relationship that had nearly broken my spirit. It would teach them that no matter how badly they behaved, I would always be there to bail them out. It would prove Jessica's ugly assessment of me correct, that my only value was in my money. With a deep breath, I put the phone down. My love for my son was unconditional, but my financial support was not. He had to face this. This was his rock bottom, his moment of truth. He and his wife had made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. My role was no longer to shield him from life's hardships, especially the ones he had helped create. A week later, Mark called. His voice was different. The anger was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was a hollowed-out exhaustion. "You heard, I guess," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I got the letter from the bank." "Yes," I replied softly. He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear him take a shaky breath. "We're staying with Jessica's parents. It's crowded." "I'm sorry to hear that, Mark." And I truly was. "I get it now, Mom," he said, and the words sounded like they were physically painful for him to say. "I get what you were trying to tell me. I stood by and let it happen. I let her disrespect you, and I let your money make me weak. I thought keeping her happy was my only job, and I used you to do it. It was wrong. I was a coward." Tears welled in my eyes. It was the apology I had never expected to receive. It was real. It wasn't about the money. It was about him finally understanding the human cost of his actions. "I was so focused on the life I thought we were supposed to have," he continued, "the big house, the nice cars. I lost sight of what was important. I lost sight of you." "I love you, Mark," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I have never stopped loving you." "I love you too, Mom. I'm so sorry." We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about the house. We talked about him. He had started looking for a new job, something with more stability. He said things with Jessica were difficult. The stress had exposed the deep cracks in their relationship that my money had helped to paper over. Their future was uncertain, and for the first time he was facing it head-on. Our relationship is not what it once was. It's not the simple, innocent bond of a mother and her young son. It's something new, something more honest and fragile. We talk on the phone once a week. He tells me about his job search. I tell him about my photography. He has never asked me for money again, and I have never offered. The $5,000 transfer was never reinstated. I don't know if Mark and Jessica will stay together. I don't know where he will end up living, or what his life will look like. But I know that my son is finally growing up. He is learning the hard lessons of accountability and respect. As for me, my life is fuller and richer than it has been in years. My home is a sanctuary of peace, not a place of tension. My days are my own. I have learned that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but an act of self-love. My dignity, I've discovered, has no price tag, and my worth is not measured by my bank account or my employment status, but by the quiet strength I found when I was pushed to my limit. I am not a tramp living off a dead man's money. I am Eleanor, and I am finally free. Thank you for watching until here, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you.